And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce two cybersecurity professionals today, Sean Connolly and Jeff Hickman from HYPR, the passwordless company. How are you guys?
We're brilliant.
Yeah, doing really well. Really well.
So it's really exciting to talk about passwordless authentication, mainly due to it's becoming mainstream, and there's more and more companies looking into getting finally, after all those years, getting rid of passwords. But I'd like to talk about what does passwordless authentication mean specifically around the whole area of zero trust. But before we jump into that, you guys have amazing history, and I wish we could do like just a session with each one of you guys, but I have you guys both on the same time. But if you don't mind, let's jump into kind of your background in terms of how you got to where you are, what your current role at HYPR, just building some clout around you guys personally. Who wants to start? Sean, maybe
I can jump in. So
yeah.
I'm Sean Connolly. I've been at your physical meetups before, and it's nice. So being from New Jersey, I don't have to get on a train to come to this. It's I can do it from my room. I have been with HYPR for close to 5 years now. I am the VP of Field Engineering at HYPR. What that means is I lead our team that is the solution engineers, the people that are going out, selling it, setting the expectations around what passwordless is and what does it mean for zero trust. But then also leading the team that implements that solution as well. Zero trust, as you can imagine, is something that we've been talking about for the course of those 5 years. But prior to HYPR, I worked for another authentication company too, an identity access management company. So overall, I've been in this space for roughly a decade. It's been a whirlwind. It's been a lot of fun. And at my time at HYPR, I've seen tremendous growth at the company, but also just in the industry as a whole. You asked, what is passwordless for zero trust? Passwordless itself is even something that we've been talking about for close to a decade now. And it's always been an aspiration, but we're finally at that state where it's a reality, and it's something that HYPR is helping people realize. So it's a passion of mine, something I'm excited about. And the same for Jeff. I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, and before I'll make a comment. You need it's 10,000 hours to become proficient in anything, according to the latest books. So you definitely have that. You've been in authentication for a long time. So it's like the doctor authentication, right? You've done authentication at the enterprise level for quite some time, right?
Yeah, you can call me MD now. I'm the doctor of authentication.
10 years is a long time to do this. This is no joke.
It is.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm Jeff Hickman. I'm a senior solutions engineer with HYPR. Kind of the same story as Sean. I've been doing this for over a decade now. I actually started out as a developer. I was writing custom code for customers at an IAM vendor, and got into the point where I really liked solving the conceptual challenge for customers, where they couldn't even see how the product would work in their environment, how they would figure out all the pieces put together, the puzzle, if you will. And that's the part that really drew me into the more customer-facing, solutions-oriented role. So I've been doing, again, authentication, specifically in IAM as a whole for over a decade. Spent some time doing identity verification, single sign-on, governance, and compliance. Kind of touched all pieces of it. And when I came to HYPR, the thing that interests me is throughout my career, I constantly saw, we got to deal with password resets. Hey, we're getting breached and it's because of a password. Hey, these people misconfigured this and it's a weak password. And no one ever really had a good solution other than adding things on top of it. And you mentioned before with zero trust and passwordless and the time and moving into things right now. What's interesting about it is that every solution we've seen previously has always been additive, right? We've always added something on top, whether it's more risk, whether it's more friction for the end user. Passwordless is one of those technologies that finally reduces the friction. Right? It removes something from the equation and is more secure in doing it. So really passionate about it, excited to be here and excited to talk to you as well. I'm on the West Coast though, not an East Coast guy, but I'm happy to be here and contributing as well.
And then you're going to have to talk to us about those guitars in the back.
There you go.
And this is, just so you guys know, this is a conversation that's completely unscripted, just the way I like doing it. So all the questions I shoot and ask right now, they're all kind of off the cuff here. So they're doing a great job. So Jeff, maybe we'll do a short a musician kind of stint section. When we have time for a few minutes. What's your favorite music section to play? Stairway to Heaven?
No, Stairway to Heaven. That's played out, right? No, that's actually this side bass guitar behind me. So I'm a bass player. I have an acoustic guitar, but that's a little, messing around with. But I played bass all through high school, all the way growing up. It's just something. It's kind of one of those stress relievers, right? You kind of get into it and forget about everything else. And so I end up playing a lot of Red Hot Chili Peppers because Flea, their bassist, is who I learned of copying, right, on that side. And so I definitely play and listen to a lot of that.
That's awesome. So, and we'll ask you to take it out afterwards for a few minutes.
Don't put me on that spot.
Why not, Jeff?
When Jeff started at HYPR, he wrote the Passwordless song. So he's got a full song for passwordless authentication. We can write one for Zero Trust too. Maybe the next time we can play that.
Yeah, and you know what's amazing is there are so many musicians in the cybersecurity space. There's a correlation between. Yeah, seriously, this is a theme that I've seen, a thread. People that are there's something about music and how it relates to to numbers and how it relates to solving problems and how it relates to solving problems specifically for cybersecurity. So I've seen that happen over and over again. But let's jump into the question is, what is Zero Trust? Like you help large enterprise and medium-sized enterprise, and Zero Trust means different things to different people, and also and maybe like just define what that is, and define how that is being solved specifically around authentication and passwordless authentication. So maybe you jump into that. Who wants to give it a try?
You want to start, Sean, and then I'll follow up, or do you want me to start?
We'll arm wrestle over it. I'll give a soft intro, and then Mr. Hickman can take it away too. The thing I'm going to start with is what Zero Trust is not. And Perfect. The reason I say that is Zero Trust is not just a marketing campaign. I think that's become the joke, is who's going to talk about Zero Trust next, and it's always some form of a marketing message, and how every product under the sun helps Zero Trust. So Zero Trust is not a marketing campaign. I think it's important that we understand that. I've quite literally spoken to CISOs before, and CISOs say, if you bring up Zero Trust, I don't want to meet with you anymore. So it's something that has tremendous value. It's a framework that security teams can aspire to achieving or have realized themselves. But it is not a marketing campaign. It's something for us to open up with just when we start talking about Zero Trust itself. Jeff, why don't you jump into the details of Zero Trust? But we're a company that takes it more seriously and can also talk through what technically we're doing for this too.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember, especially when we're talking about authentication, is Zero Trust. It kind of has a, well, you don't trust me type of feel to it. Why do I have to do this? It can have this bad connotation, but really what it's about is it's reestablishing that trust at every access point. And how do we reestablish trust? Usually is through authentication. And today, if we looked at a lot of Zero Trust implementations, there comes this kind of pushback from the end users, right? Where it's, well, hey, before I just logged onto my computer, clicked on this single sign-on platform, and I was ready to go. Now you're asking me to log into the computer, authenticate to the VPN. I got to re-authenticate to this, and there's different checkpoints. There's a lot of solutions out there that are trying to streamline that, right? To remove some of the burden through risk engines and things along those lines. But passwordless really makes that any point that you need to put friction in that Zero Trust model to establish the trust, it makes it really smooth, right? Rather than having to go for the username, the password, and then pull out your phone or find the token. Instead, you're doing it all usually from a single device, right? You're either your username's cached or you type it in, and then boom, you push from your mobile device or your token, and you're in directly to the application, and that can follow you all the way through, and then re-authenticate through the trust of, in our case, FIDO, right? Of saying, hey, this is public-private key cryptography, and we can establish the trust that way. So authentication is pivotal to Zero Trust. It's how you know that person behind the keyboard or behind the device is who they say they are. And it's a key concept of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the whole notion of Zero Trust is don't trust anyone, right? So, and the reason why you don't trust anyone is because the lack of trust in the whole password mechanism and the authentication mechanism, right? And what's happening when companies are trying to implement Zero Trust, overlaying into an existing infrastructure of passwords that they already have, which is kind of creates that friction that you just talked about. And maybe like, let's talk about the caveats of doing that, of trying to implement zero trust in a quote unquote traditional infrastructure? What are kind of the caveats to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges. And one of the biggest ones that we kind of overlook when we're focused in on technology is what users are used to, right? There's a big amount of kind of stock that needs to be put into this is how we've always done it, and now you're going to be changing it. I've never talked to a person that said, I love my password, but at the same time, everyone's used to using passwords. So when we talk about shifting that mentality, it can hit a little bit of resistance. You're going to get rid of my password. Well, how's that going to work? How am I going to log into this? How am I going to do that? So a lot of times I personally will talk to customers and vendors and other people in the industry and say, it's a journey. It's not a day one switch that everyone goes passwordless, but we move everyone in that direction. So a lot of caveats you'll hit are things like password resets. What is going to happen when I have to change my password if not everything is in a passwordless way yet? What's going to happen if I forget it and I have to go recover my password? What's going to happen when we increase complexity to passwords, right? We're going to go from maybe 8 characters with decent complexity to 12 characters. How is that going to impact workflows and things along those lines? Those are usually some of the big challenges that we hit initially, is those questions around, this is what we currently do. We're moving to a less password or passwordless state. How do we handle these ways where we have to know who the user is to do privilege actions like reset passwords and things like that?
And why doesn't the traditional MFA, multi-factor authentication, work? We've seen that over and over again where companies implement the 2-factor or multi-factor, and it's still, facing all those gaps associated with running at large scale. Why is that? Maybe.
Yeah. I think there's a multitude of reasons. Again, I always start from a place of kind of the emotional side of it, right? Of how people feel, right? And MFA traditionally is additive. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but you're adding something onto the process. You're inherently just making it harder, right? And it takes a while for people to adjust to that, right? To people to remember, I got to have that token. I got to look at my phone. Maybe my phone's in the other room. So you get some friction on that side. It also, a lot of users that are not in technology feel like you're putting a burden in front of them to just getting their work done, right? I got to do this extra step. I just want to get my work done. That mentality over the past, I would say 5 years, is changing a bit because everyone's getting really used to MFA. But what they're getting really used to is the phishable MFAs, right? The SMS, send me an OTP code, right? Getting a TOTP out of an app or something along those lines, or even a push sometimes where the session can be hijacked through a man in the middle.
Let's talk to Jeff. Let's talk a bit about that, because is there a false sense of security where people implementing these MFAs and they're thinking, okay, we're done, but yet what you just described is far from that. There's a lot of ways to circumvent that. So let's dive into, because you kind of went through very quickly, let's dive into what does that mean, and maybe some examples for, because again, you're a professional doing that on a day-to-day basis. So maybe talk to me about some examples that happened in the industry recently.
Yeah, Sean, I think you have a couple of good ones that you've ran across recently, haven't you, around the phishing and things along those lines?
I have. So I think it's interesting. You both laid out 2 interesting points. One is it's the friction that usually causes a failure in a zero trust strategy. So as you're imposing something that are additive, traditional MFA is you adding layers of that experience on top of the user. And that eventually gets too heavy. It drags the user down, it gets them frustrated, and it reduces their motivation to do the work at all, frankly. Dave, I think you called out the fact that companies are starting to implement things like adaptive technologies as well. And the adaptive technologies are starting to take foothold for 2 reasons. One is we understand that there's inherent flaws in our security today. Passwords are obviously insecure, but we're seeing things like SMS and SIM swapping. It's something I cannot say 3 times fast. But one of our sales reps here, they were quite literally a victim of a SIM swapping attack. Someone got a hold of his driver's license, went to Verizon, took over his account, went to a bank, started getting OTPs for his account, and that is inherently insecure. So what we're doing is adding adaptive technologies on top of it because we don't trust the security that's being implemented. Those 2 things are massively a problem, and it puts us in this vicious cycle where we're trying to implement zero trust, but we're layering on adaptive technologies because we don't trust the technologies that are deployed to secure ourselves, where what we need to do is look at what is the source of the problem. And the source of the problem is all of these share a shared secret. All of these are dependent on some centrally stored secret that a user needs to type in, a centrally stored secret that is then texted to the user and they then have to type in. And what HYPR is looking at doing is let's eliminate shared secrets holistically. It's not just the password, but it's all shared secrets that need to be eliminated. And that puts us in a position where we're able to come in and remove the burden of additive factors. And we're able to help you achieve zero trust because there is no central source that can be taken over or anything anyone can go after. And it's not phishable. Like we're giving our end users the control where they're always the ones pushing the authentication, as opposed to me firing out push notifications to someone in hopes that someone will click accept on it.
Yeah.
So instead of fixing inherently a flawed, a concept of shared secrets, you eliminate the whole concept. And isn't it too much of a heavy lifting to companies? Because again, if I was somebody, senior to the company, and I'm thinking, okay, this is how we've done this for so long, and we have, how the infrastructure is always, so complex. There are like so many systems tied to that shared secret repository, all those identities that are tied in and all those partners are tied in. Talk to me about what does that mean from let's say a, potential customer is looking at doing that, making that decision to finally move away from the shared secret. What does that look like? Because I'm assuming you get those questions all the time. Where do we start? How do we make sure that our users are not impacted in such a way that all of a sudden they can't get in? Because that's the worst nightmare, that somebody with 20,000 employees, you get that phone call in the morning saying, well, we 10,000 employees cannot access the systems,
Yeah.
So that's probably the CISO's worst nightmare right there.
I mean, all of this is mission critical. If I was talking to a CISO last week, and if one user is down, it can cost their business millions of dollars. If your CEO can't log in, the cost of that is tremendous. And that's why it's top priority for us is ensuring that there's always a process that's not disruptive and there's always paths people can authenticate. But to the point of your question, this does seem like something that can be overwhelming or scary, but it's twofold. Like if you're actually looking at implementing a zero trust architecture, you're going to be looking at all of these points anyway. This is something that you're going to be evaluating regardless. What is the authentication look like at every step of the way? And what can we do to drive success of a zero trust architecture in those areas? Well, it sounded like we all agreed that burden or poor user experiences is one of the big pitfalls of zero trust. Implementing HYPR then in those cases gives you a positive, gives you a gain. It's more likely to be accepted as you push out your zero trust strategy. More broadly speaking, though, it can be overwhelming to think through the fact that we've been using passwords for decades, and removing that is not a trivial task. But that's the value of something like HYPR. It's people and experts that have been doing this for decades in the case of this call, and a technology that's been proven out to scale. Our job as a vendor and the job of our peers in this industry are to make it as simple as possible for enterprises to be able to take this technology in and to deploy it at scale. So that really, HYPR or anyone in this industry, that is our mission, is how do we take security, something that will truly provide you value, and make it as simple for you to implement it at scale.
And I think if I can add on to that a little bit as well, when we're talking to these organizations, we have to look at where a lot of their attacks are coming from, right? Where are the majority of the attacks targeting? And it's user populations, right? With phishing, right? Whether it's spear phishing or just mass mailing it out. So when we talk about removing the shared secrets, if we can target most of the user population, 95% of it, and we can reduce their password use by 99%, maybe they have one application that is that legacy dusty box in the corner, right, that no one wants to upgrade because it's core or whatever. If we can reduce that entire attack surface and remove shared secrets, they're in an inherently more secure place because of that, right? Because you're making that needle hole really small for the attacker to go after. If there are any remaining shared secrets. So it's, again, I want to stress it's not an all or nothing, but it is when you're building these architectures, when you're looking at these things, it's moving in these directions and putting the proper process and procedure in place to eventually move everything to, no shared secrets and no passwords.
In actuality, what's that process look like? Let's say somebody wanted to say, hey, how do we start? What's the kind of the process of getting started? How do we test it out? When you sit down, like in those initial discovery conversations, what those conversations typically look like?
Yeah, Jeff shows up with his infamous magic wand, waves it around a little bit, and from there, the customer no longer has passwords.
I wish.
I wish too. I wish too. I think it's what Jeff said, though. We sit down with our customers and say, what are your biggest problems? What are your biggest pains? And there's going to be surface areas that are not the same for everyone. I worked with a bank a few years ago, and their tellers were typing in passwords 50 times a day, over 50 times a day. Talk about the amount of time.
And it's typical, right? Those numbers are typical, right?
They are.
Yeah.
They are.
Which is insane.
Another fun one too. I was on either a Teams or Zoom or one of these platform calls recently, and I was on with a CISO, and her daughter walked in and said, "Hey, Mom, take a look at what I wrote for you." And there was a art pad up or notepad up with a message on it, and it was that realization of my kid had access to my computer while I was away. So we all have challenges, and those challenges are evolving over time as we're interfacing with work differently. But that challenge is never going to be the same organization over organization. So our job when we sit down with customers is to understand where are the biggest problems you face today, whether that's security related, your zero trust aspiration, if that's user experience related, operationally, you are spending millions on password reset requests, and we'll hone in on that. We'll help you achieve some early wins on solving for that, so you can visually show the successes of your deployment of becoming passwordless, while we then start to plan at attacking the entire enterprise. Like, what does the remainder of your enterprise look like? You've got the big win. Let's drive that through the rest.
So do people decide, okay, let's pick as you mentioned, those tellers, they authenticated so many times a day, so they pick like the kind of the easiest place where they get the most bang for the buck, like in terms of what's the highest friction and the easiest to implement, right? And then you can immediately almost define what the ROI looks like. Okay, as you mentioned, like how many minutes per day per employee, and what's the password reset look like, and so on, because that's also it's a very high cost, right? These password resets. I mean, I don't know what you guys probably know the numbers better than I do in terms of like what numbers are we looking at in terms of how many password resets are being requested on a regular basis, right? What's the average for large enterprise?
I've seen everything from a quarter to 50% of help desk requests are password related, and it's just mind-boggling to me that that's the reality. And depending on the size of organization you're working with, it's tens of thousands all the way up to millions of dollars being spent on passwords. And to the point you just made, we're only talking about password resets right now. It's not productivity loss. It's not the amount of hours spent typing in passwords. There's a bank we're working with, and they quite literally quantified how many times a day an employee types a password, the average time it takes them to type a password. And then they did all of the math to identify this is how much money we're paying people to type passwords. Like that's the extreme. I've never seen someone go that far, but it is true too. Like, we are truly paying people to do it. So everyone's got different insights about their organizations themselves. We understand the industry and those averages, but it's our job to help identify what is going to get them those big wins.
Yeah, I think there is.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, I just think there is a point of commonality right around here, especially in today. I mean, the past 2 years have been crazy as it is, but that point of commonality is the desktop, right? Both the desktop and the SSO platform, right? Where all these organizations we're walking into is, they don't have a solution for, you're working from home now. We've shipped you your laptop, or you took it home from the office with you. How do you protect that when it's in the home or in the coffee shop or wherever you're at, now that things are opening back up again? How do we protect that actual desktop piece? And that's something that, HYPR does well, and most passwordless technologies do well, is protect that actual initial point of access. And then another very common thread is the SSO platform. Where do the users go from there? What's the next thing? Everything's almost a cloud app nowadays, right? So they're immediately jumping into email that's hosted in the cloud. They're going to this productivity app or this, other communication or collaboration app. They're hosted in the cloud. So if we can then also say, hey, let's remove the passwords from any of that, even though SSO kind of helps in that place, but even the front door to that, let's remove the password. Those are some easy wins, kind of just to go back to your earlier point of where organizations start.
And you, aside from the zero trust framework, we also mentioned FIDO is part of this conversation. And I want to, for those who are not familiar with FIDO, maybe talk to me about what that framework is. And then, there's again, I don't want to steal your thunder, but there's a tremendous adoption recently for a lot of very large organizations that are kind of jumping with 2 feet into this, adoption of that framework. So who wants to jump in on that?
Either of us. We're about to arm wrestle again for it. So I'll lead with it. So FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online. FIDO's been around for 9 to 10 years now, I believe. And FIDO is an alliance that was put together with the sole mission of eliminating passwords and making it much easier and more secure to transact as a consumer online. Where people have probably seen FIDO recently is over the past few years, FIDO2 or WebAuthn. It may have been seen in the headlines, but WebAuthn is something where the W3C organization took and standardized around with the browsers how you can take FIDO and use it at scale within web applications. So it is really hitting trajectory within the market. A lot of awareness is around FIDO today. I remember, I want to say 8 years ago, talking to people about the emergence of FIDO, and the company I was with at the time didn't really have any plans for it, but everyone was just asking, is this going to be a reality? Fast forward to where we are today, and you've got people like Google, like Microsoft, like Amazon, all part of FIDO. And these are the people that are literally defining the internet, defining the devices, and defining what we as consumers do. So when you have organizations like that pushing FIDO forward, it very clearly is going to be the passwordless standard as we move forward as an industry. And what HYPR does, HYPR is a board member of FIDO. We use FIDO as a core with all of our technologies. We are never going to compromise to a shared secret. FIDO is always enforced, but we make that scalable for an enterprise. So where WebAuthn is great for a browser and where WebAuthn is great for logging into an online application, Jeff called out desktops. A lot of people have servers. There's many more components to a zero trust architecture than just a browser. And HYPR makes FIDO extensible to all of that within an enterprise.
So if you wanted to start with FIDO, then in actuality implement FIDO in your organization, whether it's for internal or external facing to their clients. So HYPR is a good place to start, right?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the adoption of it, do you find companies first start with the internal self, like, eating your own dog food before applying it to their customers, or it doesn't matter, or they solve interchangeably to both internal as well as external? What's typically like the kind of the first, types of deployments you've seen?
It really depends where their problem lies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why they initially reach out to us and talk. I've seen it kind of both ways, right? Both coming at it from a workforce angle and both from a consumer angle. But I would say what happens more frequently is they come with a workforce problem. Either they're going zero trust or they just want to eliminate passwords because of the fatigue around it. And we start there, and they very quickly see when this gets into the hands of the business owners, the product owners of their consumer-facing products, they go, wait a second, why don't we have this for our customers as well? Like, we shouldn't be the only ones that have this cool technology. In fact, there was an email the other day from a customer that surfaced internally that said, this is by far the coolest thing that I've ever been able to enable in my company, right? The fact that people can just log in with their mobile device now, and that it's getting a lot of buzz for how we can help our customers. And that's a very common thread that we see. And so again, to go back, it depends on where initially the customer interest is, but usually it starts workforce and works its way out. And aside from those few kind of leading edge companies that have they're up on it and they have the top engineers that have embraced it.
Yeah, and maybe this is time also to mention, the current events. Obviously, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine creates an elevated sense of urgency around securing the enterprise, and we've seen increase in potential ransomware attacks as well as phishing attacks that are targeting very specific companies. How does elimination of the password completely helps with becoming more secure in that regards?
I'll first just say we've got employees from Ukraine and employees with families there, so obviously our hearts are with everyone affected by it. On the topic of cybersecurity, though, this is cybersecurity warfare unlike anything we've ever seen before, and that's where I've had call after call after call with our customers who are international businesses, enterprises with presence there, trying to identify what can we do for authentication in these times? And what if there is no accessibility to the internet? What do we do then? How do we continue to maintain our authentication stature or zero trust stature in those environments? And HYPR's got tools that help enable companies to be able to do so. But it's first us looking at the fact that we are there to support everyone affected, and it's a time of need, and we need to come together. And I think the industry is doing that at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there's been a lot of collaboration to Sean's point in the industry. I mean, just watching the news come out of it, all the different sources that are talking about this thing. And to your point about how do we help in this space, I think if you eliminate that shared secret, right, you get rid of that, you're phishing, we become phishing resistant MFA. In fact, I think there was a memo posted or published by the OMB recently that talked about how if you're going to be doing zero trust, if you're going to be implementing these different things, you need to implement a phishing resistant MFA. That's what FIDO is. There's nothing, when a user types something in to log in, that instantly puts it in the category of phishable. When they don't have to type anything in, right? When they can just use a token or their mobile device and it's initiated by the user, then it's not as easily phishable by a bad actor. It's a bit more phishing resistant. And then same thing with ransomware. If you get rid of the shared secrets, it's a lot harder for that ransomware worm or whatever it is to laterally move. Right? Because how does it normally get in there? It gets into a system. It has a credential that it can use then to get to other systems. If there's no credential, if there's no shared secret for it to steal and be able to move to systems, you help a lot with reducing that spread of that ransomware.
And it's amazing. Like, if I let what you just said sink in, I don't understand why are companies waiting to get hacked and get ransomware where they're going to spend so much money where they can just solve the core issue of getting phished and getting hacked and eventually getting ransomware because somebody had elevated credentials and then they start encrypting their domain controllers, and then before you know it, the whole organization is shut down. Why don't they just fix it now before and spend a fraction of what they would spend, right? So this is mind-boggling to me that we're always as industry very reactive as opposed to being proactive and solving the issue at the core.
Heck, that's why I joined HYPR. I mean, that exactly what you're saying right there is exactly why I joined HYPR and was passionate about passwordless, is because how reactive we've been and we can actually do something proactive now. But I think you earlier talked about a point, and we kind of discussed a little bit of why organizations are not necessarily embracing this, which is that fear of the unknown, right? We haven't done passwordless before. This is how we've been doing the internet and computers for multiple decades now. This is what everyone's used to. So now we're talking about changing that. And that's a very big paradigm shift, right, for a lot of organizations. And it's not just the technical folk, right? It's not just us in IT and development and things along those lines. Just everyday people, as I mentioned before, they're used to this. And so it's a big shift and a big change. The other thing, too, is that there have been attempts to do passwordless at a lot of organizations in the past. And the technology hasn't been there to support them to do that. I think we're at the right time in the market and the right time in technology right now, where it's finally coming together going like, hey, the technology's here. We have organizations and companies like HYPR that can do the technology, right? And then everyone's kind of ready for it because these threats are so emergent and we don't have a good solution for them still.
I think people should not fear this. I mean, just watching you get the way you are passionate about it. And not even that, just the way you're knowledgeable about it. Like, you guys are like the Jedi of passwordless authentication. Why should somebody be afraid of moving forward is beyond me. But also, I've heard stories of people using HYPR at a company and then moving to another company and then requesting the same type of experience, and that's how they get back to you as well. Is that also the case? Sometimes it's almost addictive, right? Once you start using something else aside from entering the password, 50 times a day, you want to have the same experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, imagine going from a state where you never have to type a password in again. You join a new company and they say, okay, figure out what your 16-character password is going to be. You're going to lose your mind. Like, you're going to lose your mind. I think more broadly speaking too, this is becoming the natural evolution as mobile devices, as an example, are becoming a natural extension of ourselves in a lot of ways. And we talk to people all the time. You forget a password frequently. I think that's understood at this point. If you're driving to the office and you're using a security key, you're probably not going to turn around and go back home if you're halfway to the office and forgot it. But if you're halfway to the office and forgot your phone, you're going to turn around and go get your phone because it's becoming that extension of yourself. So just we as a society are starting to become much more comfortable with technology and the emergence of newer technologies. And HYPR is really helping attribute to that too. You're going to be comfortable. You're going to be happy not having a password. If you go to a new company and have a 16-character password, you're not going to be happy anymore.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying at this point, I was trying to put myself in that headspace of being like, if I went to somewhere else and I had to start using a password again, I don't think I could do that. So I get where that story is coming from, of people moving organizations, and that's really cool to hear.
Maybe that's a contribution to the Great Resignation of people like going back to companies with passwords and say, we don't want that. We have to resign to move to another company that doesn't use that. But let's find out what's the easiest way for somebody to get going and start. How easy to reach out. And maybe Sean, you can kind of respond to that while Jeff gets one of his guitars and maybe bust one of the Red Hot Chili Pepper tunes.
He's going to play the Passwordless theme song.
Oh man, you guys gonna put me on the spot.
Yeah, let's do it. Come on.
No, I'm not good enough to do that in front of an audience.
Jeff, okay, when no one's here, you can jam. So we hosted a company-wide meeting last week, and I've been here close to 5. There's been several team members who've been here 3-4 years, and what we showcased at the meeting was just how far our technology at HYPR and as an industry has come. And I did a showcasing of getting HYPR deployed to a desktop and getting HYPR deployed to a cloud provider, Okta, for passwordless authentication. And it took literally 5 minutes. Signed up on the website, got an email, activated my account, and got both of those technologies literally deployed within 5 minutes. So everyone's more excited than ever just because of that fact that our mission as a vendor is to make this as simple as possible for people to scale out. And we've achieved that. So for someone to get started with this, obviously we'll sit down with our customers, understand what are the biggest problems, why are they diving into this? And then we'll give them that 5-minute path to becoming passwordless and show them that the 5 minutes to showcase this is great. This is how you scale it out in an enterprise as well.
And basically, you're well on your way to automate this whole thing, and means that you, Sean, and Jeff, you're not hiring anymore because it's all going to be completely automated. You're automating your own job eventually. No, but
that's the goal, right? I mean, yeah.
So and when they do that, the adding additional users, that's a process that doesn't take as long as well, right? I mean, that's how they start. You start with a smaller group of people, and then you add.
Exactly.
And I'm assuming, again, there's almost the envy factor, right? Once somebody showcases to somebody else and they say, well, why don't I have it? Yeah. I mean, I'm just assuming that's the case as well.
That's a great case. We have a customer on the West Coast who literally, they took their team that was responsible for identity, who all were using HYPR, and they did a roadshow. They went around virtually as well as where they could physically. They went around and they didn't say outright that, hey, I don't have to log in using a password anymore. They just showed it. They just said, oh, my screen, it locked while I was talking here. Let me unlock it, grab my phone, click, never hit a password. The machine opens up, they're into it. Or they went to some site where they never hit a password. They just were in. And people were like, wait a second. That's cool. Why are we not talking about that? Right? That's the thing that I want. And so they got some word of mouth going because that team was using passwordless. And they got people asking about, well, how did you do that? How does that work? And that allowed them to get that interest and allowed to grow their kind of beta group from maybe 100 users up to multiple thousands of users that it is now, before they're going to now start to edict it and say, hey, everyone's got to use this. So that was a really cool word of mouth way to see that grow inside that company.
And what if you use cloud applications? There's a lot of organizations today that basically don't kind of own their infrastructure. How would you deploy then? Is there also an easy path to do that as well? Let's say you use any kind of SaaS platforms.
It's another one. Fully automate the entire experience for them. So they sign up, they tell us which cloud provider they're using, and we've got an automated path to get the entire thing set up. And then from there, it's pulling in the users, identifying how you're going to get them registered out, and get that word of mouth effect going too. while you're pushing this out.
And you're compliant with the, some of these organizations have to be compliant and, with the like financial regulations. So you're then compliant. You can like do the check marks that you have all the authentication control as well, the risk authentication based as well, right? So you're compliant with that as well, right?
SOC 2, Type 2, ISO certifications, everything you would need, we've got covered for you. And then obviously there's regulations our customers need to abide by, and we can help them achieve that too.
Perfect. So, and how do people reach out to you guys, if they wanted to know more, whether it's zero trust, how to implement and how to start, get going with removing the inherent risk associated with shared secrets? What's the easiest way?
Yeah, I mean, given there's zero trust, if you reach out, you have to know the secret phrase. Otherwise, I will not trust that I can talk to you. No, LinkedIn, very active. Reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know if you have questions, and we're happy to engage. Jump on a call, do a Q&A, whatever you think would be most beneficial. Let me know, let Jeff know, and we're there for you.
Yeah, we're happy to do workshops. Come in with your team, talk about zero trust, talk about passwordless, walk through some demonstrations, all that fun sort of stuff. It doesn't even have to be about HYPR necessarily, right? We can just talk to your team about that. Because we like getting feedback as well. The only way that HYPR is going to be effective for any organization is talking to as many people as possible, getting their feedback, and building the best solution in the market for it.
And this is the moment to say that, I'm intimately familiar with HYPR, and the organizational culture is such that, as Jeff mentioned, it's not about just going out there and closing the sale. This company is based on people helping each other as well as helping the industry as a whole. And it's evident with anybody that I've interviewed from HYPR, as well as meeting the rest of the team. So Jeff, you are not off the hook. Next time I'm in the HQ in New York and you're there, you're gonna have to bust the Red Hot Chili Pepper guitar and do a little, at least a short tune.
There we go.
You're not out of the woods yet.
But make it happen.
I'll stay home that day.
But until then, thank you everyone for joining us. Much appreciated. I highly encourage to give it a try. Again, this is one of the I guess the unknowns around shared secrets that everybody does not talk about, but is afraid to talk about. This issue needs to be solved at the core. And I highly recommend to give it a shot. And as Sean mentioned, it's a fairly easy process, and they stand by their technology as well. And until then, thank you all for joining. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Sean, for joining us today. Much appreciated, and stay safe online as well as offline.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.